Something changed the moment you stepped back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, undeniable way that only you could truly feel. And here's the part most people won't say out loud. Your absence didn't go unnoticed. Not by the people who were used to your presence. Not by the environments that once held your energy. And definitely not by you. Because when you pulled away, you weren't running. You were waking up. There comes a moment in life where everything starts to feel off. Not wrong, not broken, just misaligned. Conversations that once felt easy begin to feel heavy. Places that once felt familiar start to feel distant. And people, even the closest ones, begin to feel like strangers you're trying to remember. It's confusing at first. You start questioning yourself. Why am I changing? Why do I feel so disconnected? Why can't I go back to how things were? But the truth is, you're not supposed to go back. Because growth doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It just begins. And sometimes it begins by pulling you away. Away from noise. Away from expectations. Away from the version of you that was built just to survive, not to truly live. That distance you created. That silence you stepped into. That space you needed. It wasn't emptiness. It was transformation. You see, not everyone will understand why you disappeared for a while. Some might think you changed too much. Others might feel like you abandoned them. But what they don't see is what it took for you to choose yourself. Because choosing yourself doesn't always look powerful from the outside. Sometimes it looks like isolation. Like saying no when you used to say yes. Like walking away without explaining everything. And that's where it gets real. Because when you stop showing up the way people expect, they notice, not always in words, but in energy. The silence you leave behind speaks. The absence of your effort becomes visible. The space you once filled becomes obvious. And suddenly, people start realizing what you were carrying. The emotional weight, the constant giving, the quiet understanding you offered without being asked. You didn't disappear. You just stopped overextending. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit spaces that no longer felt right. You stopped pretending everything was okay when it was. And that changes everything. Because now you're seeing things clearly. You're noticing patterns you once ignored. You're recognizing behaviors you once tolerated. You're becoming aware of how much of yourself you gave away just to keep peace. And awareness, once it arrives, doesn't leave. It sharpens your perspective. It deepens your understanding. It makes you pause before stepping back into old cycles. That's why returning to your old self feels impossible. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you're more aware of yourself. And awareness changes how you move. It makes you more intentional, more selective, more protective of your energy. And yes, it can feel lonely sometimes, because not everyone grows at the same pace. Not everyone questions things the way you do. Not everyone is willing to sit with themselves in silence and face what's real. But that doesn't mean you're alone. It means you're evolving. There's a quiet strength in becoming someone who no longer needs constant noise, who no longer chases validation, who no longer feels the need to explain every decision. That strength wasn't given to you. You built it, moment by moment, decision by decision. Every time you chose peace over approval. Every time you walked away instead of arguing. Every time you sat with your thoughts instead of distracting yourself. You were rebuilding yourself. And that kind of transformation doesn't go unnoticed, even if no one says it directly. People feel it when you're no longer easily accessible. They feel it when your energy shifts. They feel it when your presence becomes intentional instead of automatic. And more importantly, you feel it. You feel the difference in your mindset, in your boundaries, in the way you carry yourself. You're not reacting the same way anymore. You're not chasing the same things anymore. You're not settling the same way anymore. That's not distance for the sake of distance. That's growth. And growth requires space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to become. So if you've been feeling like you don't belong where you used to, if you've been pulling back without fully understanding why, if you've been choosing solitude over constant connection, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just in a phase where you're meeting yourself more honestly than ever before. And that takes courage, because it's easier to stay distracted. It's easier to stay the same. It's easier to keep playing roles that no longer fit. But you didn't choose easy. You chose real. And real changes you. So don't rush back into spaces that no longer feel right just because they're familiar. Don't force connections just to avoid being alone. Don't ignore what you're feeling just to make others comfortable. This phase you're in, it's not about losing people. It's about finding yourself. And when you find yourself, everything else starts to make more sense. The confusion fades. The pressure eases. The need to prove yourself disappears. Because you're no longer searching for who you are. You're becoming it. So take your time. Honor the distance you created. Respect the version of you that had the strength to step back. And trust that this shift, even if it feels uncertain, is shaping you into someone more aligned, more aware, and more at peace. Your absence didn't go unnoticed. But more importantly, your growth didn't go unseen by the one person who matters most. You. If this message resonated with you, take a moment and sit with it. Reflect on how far you've come, even if it doesn't look like progress to anyone else. And if you're on this journey of becoming, of understanding yourself on a deeper level, then this space was made for you. Stay connected with Last Call for the Chosen. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you're ready to keep exploring this path of awareness and growth. Because this isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And you're already closer than you think, and maybe that's the part no one prepares you for. What happens after the silence? After the distance? After you've stepped away long enough to finally hear your own thoughts again? Because that's when the deeper questions start to rise. Not the surface level ones, but the kind that sit heavy in your chest. What do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not trying to be everything for everyone? What feels real to me now? And those questions, they don't come with quick answers. They require honesty. The kind of honesty that strips away comfort, that challenges old beliefs, that forces you to look at your life without filters. And that's where real transformation happens. Not in the loud moments, not in dramatic changes, but in the quiet decisions no one sees. Choosing to outgrow habits that once defined you. Choosing to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Choosing to let go, even when it would be easier to hold on. That's not weakness. That's awareness in motion. And the more aware you become, the less you can pretend. You start noticing how certain environments drain you, how some conversations feel empty, how certain patterns repeat themselves until you finally decide to break them. And breaking patterns is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, because it doesn't just change your actions. It changes your identity. It forces you to become unfamiliar, even to yourself. And that can feel unsettling. There will be moments where you miss the old version of you. Not because it was better, but because it was easier. It was familiar, predictable, comfortable in a way that didn't require growth. But comfort isn't always aligned with truth. Sometimes, comfort is just a place where you stopped questioning things. And now you've started questioning everything. That's why your absence matters. Not because people suddenly realized your value, but because you finally did. You stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped ignoring what you felt deep down. You stopped forcing connections that no longer felt genuine. And in doing that, you created a new standard for your life. A standard rooted in clarity, in self-respect, in awareness. And here's what most people don't realize. When you raise your standards internally, your external world has no choice but to shift. Some people will drift away. Some connections will fade naturally. Some doors will close without explanation. Not because something went wrong, but because something within you went right. Because you're no longer trying to fit into spaces that require you to shrink. You're no longer negotiating your peace. You're no longer confusing familiarity with alignment. And that changes how you move through life. You become quieter but stronger, more reserved but more intentional, less reactive but more aware. And yes, not everyone will understand this version of you. Some might call it distance, others might call it change, but you know what it really is. It's growth. It's the result of choosing depth over distraction, truth over comfort, self-awareness over approval. And that path isn't always easy. There will be days where you question everything again, where you feel like you're in between versions of yourself. Not who you used to be, but not fully who you're becoming yet. That space can feel uncertain, but it's also where the most important shifts happen. Because you're not rebuilding from pressure. You're rebuilding from understanding. And that makes all the difference. So if you ever find yourself wondering whether this distance was worth it, whether this change is leading somewhere meaningful, remember this. You didn't step away for no reason. You didn't outgrow things by accident. You didn't start seeing clearly just to go back to confusion. There's a reason you couldn't stay the same. Because something in you was ready for more. Not more noise, not more chaos, but more truth, more alignment, more of who you really are beneath everything you were taught to be. And that version of you is still unfolding. So don't rush it. Don't try to force clarity before it arrives naturally. Don't pressure yourself to have everything figured out. Growth doesn't work like that. It unfolds in layers, in moments, in realizations that hit you when you least expect them. Just keep showing up for yourself. Keep choosing awareness, even when it's uncomfortable. Keep choosing honesty, even when it's difficult. Keep choosing growth, even when it feels slow. Because every step you're taking is leading you closer to a version of yourself that feels real. Not perfect, not flawless, but grounded, aware, and at peace with who you're becoming. And one day, you'll look back at this phase, the silence, the distance, the confusion, and you'll realize it wasn't a phase of losing yourself. It was the moment you finally started to find yourself, and when you finally begin to see it that way, everything softens. The pressure to have all the answers fades. The need to explain yourself to everyone disappears. The fear of being misunderstood loses its grip because you start realizing something deeper. Not everyone is meant to understand your journey. Not everyone is meant to walk with you through every phase of your life. And that's okay. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make you right. It just means you're on different paths now. And growth sometimes requires separation. Not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of alignment. You begin to choose what feels real over what feels familiar. You begin to value peace over constant connection. You begin to understand that not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some are meant to shape you, then release you. And that realization changes how you hold on to things. You stop gripping so tightly. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to control how everything unfolds. Instead, you observe. You listen more. You react less. You give yourself space to understand instead of rushing to respond. That's a different kind of strength. The kind that isn't loud, but is deeply rooted. Because now, you're not driven by impulse. You're guided by awareness. And awareness brings something powerful with it. Discernment. You start to feel the difference between what drains you and what fuels you. Between what's genuine and what's just convenient. Between who truly sees you and who only notices you when it benefits them. And once you feel that difference, you can't unfeel it. That's why your circle might feel smaller now. Not because you lost something valuable, but because you became more intentional about what you allow into your life. Quality replaces quantity. Depth replaces surface. Real replaces easy. And yes, that can feel isolating at times. There will be quiet nights where you wonder if things will ever feel the same again. They won't, but not in a negative way. They won't feel the same, because you're not the same. And that's the whole point. You didn't go through all of this just to return to a version of life that felt misaligned. You went through it to evolve, to understand yourself in ways you never had before, to build a connection with yourself that isn't dependent on external validation, to create a life that actually feels like yours. And that takes time. It takes patience. It takes trust. It takes the willingness to keep going, even when the path isn't fully clear. Because clarity doesn't always come at the beginning. Sometimes it comes after you've already had the courage to move forward without it. And that's what you've been doing. Even in the moments where you doubted yourself. Even in the moments where you felt lost. Even in the moments where you questioned everything. You kept going. Quietly, internally, honestly, and that matters more than you think. Because not everyone is willing to face themselves like that. Not everyone is willing to grow beyond what's comfortable. Not everyone is willing to step into the unknown just to become something more real. But you did, and you still are. So don't underestimate where you are right now. This phase, this in-between space, this quiet transformation, it's shaping you. It's teaching you how to trust yourself, how to stand on your own without constant reassurance, how to move through life with intention instead of reaction. And those lessons, they stay with you long after this phase is over. So if things feel slower right now, if life feels quieter, if your circle feels smaller, don't mistake that for stagnation. Sometimes, quiet is where clarity grows. Sometimes, distance is where truth becomes visible. Sometimes, less is exactly what you need to finally see more. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll feel it, a sense of calm that doesn't depend on circumstances, a confidence that doesn't need validation, a clarity that doesn't require constant questioning. Not because everything around you became perfect, but because something within you became steady. And that's when you'll understand. Your absence wasn't a loss. It was a shift, a necessary step, a quiet turning point, a moment where you chose growth over staying the same. So keep going, even if it's slow, even if it's uncertain, even if no one fully understands it but you. Because this journey, it was never about being seen by everyone else. It was about finally seeing yourself. And if you've made it this far, then you're already further than you think. If this message spoke to something real inside you, don't ignore that feeling. Take a moment, reflect, be honest with yourself about where you are and where you're going. And if you're committed to becoming more aware, more grounded, and more aligned with who you truly are, then stay connected with Last Call for the Chosen. Like this video if it resonated. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you realize. And subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this path of growth, clarity, and self-discovery. Because this isn't the end of your transformation. It's just the moment you finally became aware of it. And even after all of that, there will still be moments where doubt tries to return. Quietly, subtly. It won't come as chaos this time. It will come as a whisper. Was all this distance really necessary? Did I lose something I can't get back? Am I really moving forward or just drifting? And in those moments, you have to remember who you were before all of this began. Not to go back, but to see clearly. See how often you ignored your own instincts. How often you stayed in places that didn't feel right. How often you chose comfort over truth just to avoid change. You didn't leave that version of yourself behind by accident. You outgrew it. And outgrowing something can feel a lot like losing it. But it's not loss. It's expansion. You didn't become less connected. You became more aligned. You didn't become distant. You became intentional. You didn't lose yourself. You stopped pretending to be someone you're not. That's why this journey feels so internal. Because it's not about proving anything to the outside world. It's about becoming honest with the inside one. And honesty changes everything. It changes how you see your past. It changes how you handle your present. It changes what you're willing to accept in your future. You start recognizing that not every opportunity is meant for you. Not every connection deserves your energy. Not every path aligns with who you're becoming. And that awareness protects you, not by building walls, but by giving you clarity. Clarity to walk away without guilt. Clarity to say no without over-explaining. Clarity to choose yourself without needing permission. And once you reach that point, you start to feel something new. Not excitement, not intensity, but stability. A grounded sense of self that doesn't shake easily. A quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced. A calm understanding that you're exactly where you need to be, even if you're still figuring things out. That's growth at its deepest level. Not loud, not visible to everyone, but undeniable to you. And slowly, you begin to rebuild. Not your old life, but a new one. One decision at a time. You choose what aligns. You release what doesn't. You move forward, not out of pressure but out of understanding. And the more you do that, the more your life starts to reflect who you really are. Not who you were told to be. Not who you had to be to fit in. But who you've discovered yourself to be through experience, reflection, and change. That's when things begin to feel different. Not easier, but clearer. Challenges still come. Uncertainty still exists. But now, you meet it differently, with awareness instead of reaction, with patience instead of panic, with trust instead of fear, because you've already faced something harder, yourself. And once you've done that, everything else becomes a little less overwhelming. So if you ever find yourself looking back, wondering if you made the right choice by stepping away, by changing, by choosing this path, don't just look at what you left behind. Look at who you've become. Look at your mindset, your boundaries, your awareness, your ability to sit with yourself without needing constant distraction. That didn't exist before like it does now. That was built, and anything built with truth lasts. So trust this version of you, the one who chose growth over comfort, the one who chose awareness over illusion, the one who chose to step back instead of losing themselves completely. That version of you knows what it's doing, even when it feels uncertain, even when the path isn't fully visible, even when the next step isn't clear. Because growth isn't about having all the answers. It's about becoming someone who can handle the questions. And you're becoming that person more and more each day. So keep going. Stay grounded in what you've learned. Stay honest with what you feel. Stay committed to becoming someone who lives with intention, not just reaction. And most importantly, don't go back to being accessible to everything, just because you're no longer accessible to what drains you. Your energy is valuable. Your presence is meaningful. Your time matters. And where you choose to place those things shapes your entire life. So place them wisely, because your absence didn't just go unnoticed. It created space. Space for clarity. Space for growth. Space for a version of you that no longer needs to shrink to belong. And that version of you is just getting started, and now here you are. Not where you started, not where you thought you'd be, but somewhere real, somewhere honest. And that matters more than perfection ever could. Because this version of you is no longer chasing noise, no longer trying to be understood by everyone, no longer abandoning yourself just to feel accepted. This version of you pauses, observes, chooses. And that's power, not the kind that needs attention, but the kind that changes your entire life from within. So don't water yourself down just because others are more comfortable with the old you. Don't shrink just to fit into spaces you've already. Don't go silent on your growth just because it makes others question their own. You didn't come this far just to return to a version of yourself that felt incomplete. You came this far to evolve, to see clearly, to live intentionally. And that requires courage, the kind of courage you've already been showing quietly. So now I'm going to ask you something real. Are you ready to fully step into this version of yourself? Not halfway, not when it's convenient, but completely. Because once you do, everything changes. The way you think, the way you move, the way you allow people into your life. You stop settling. You stop over-explaining. You stop doubting your own growth. And you start living on your own terms. So if something in this message connected with you, if you felt that shift while listening, if you recognize yourself in these words, don't ignore that. That's awareness calling you forward. And this is your moment to respond. Drop a comment right now and write, I choose growth, not for anyone else, but as a commitment to yourself. Hit like if you're done shrinking who you are just to be accepted. Subscribe to Last Call for the Chosen if you're serious about becoming more aware, more grounded, and more aligned with your real self. Because this channel isn't about hype, it's about truth. And if you're still here, it means you're not just watching, you're awakening to something deeper within yourself. So stay connected, stay consistent, and most importantly, stay real with yourself, because your absence already showed you something powerful. Now it's time for your presence to show the world who you've become.